They hardly recognize what they are doing to you. You sit there quietly, nodding, holding your breath, while the air grows heavier with every passing second. You remind yourself to be patient, to show kindness, to understand. Yet deep inside, something aches. You are trying to remain close to people who make your soul feel far from itself. You've handed out countless second chances. You've rewritten stories so others could appear kinder in them. You've made excuses for their silence, rationalized their coldness, and justified their disrespect as stress, or simply just the way they are. And here you remain, drained, confused, and strangely guilty for even considering walking away. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists but will grow in size." He wasn't only speaking of circumstances. He meant the way we cling to people who no longer fit our lives. The way we stay in dynamics that diminish our spirit. The way we fear detaching because we believe letting go means we have become heartless. But what if it doesn't? What if detachment is not the death of love, but the restoration of dignity? What if detachment isn't about cutting people off, but cutting through the illusion that you owe them your peace? Let's start from there. From childhood, many of us were taught one clear rule about connection: stick it out. Forgive quickly. Don't leave people behind. Stay loyal. Be the bigger person. But no one told you that this message, when given without wisdom, could erode your inner world. You become the one who carries too much. You become the one who explains away words that cut you open. You become the one who stays even when your nervous system screams for you to leave. You think you are being kind, but in truth, you are betraying yourself. Loyalty without boundaries always turns into self-abandonment. Jung believed that every time you silence that inner signal, whether it's discomfort, unease, or quiet dread, you drift further from your authentic self. Because your soul doesn't speak through logic, it speaks through feelings. And when it feels unsafe, unheard, unseen, it does not lie. So if your body tightens around certain people, if your energy fades in certain rooms, if your heart feels as though it is holding its breath when certain names appear on your phone, that's not an overreaction. That's memory surfacing. Here is the common myth. People believe detachment means turning cold, becoming distant, cutting off anyone who causes discomfort. But Jung's perspective was different. He believed true detachment is not about walls, it is about space. The kind of space that allows you to see clearly, to no longer be consumed by another's chaos, to observe your feelings without drowning in them. Detachment is not the absence of care. It is the presence of clarity. You can still love someone and walk away. You can still understand someone and protect your peace. You can even forgive someone and never speak to them again. That is not cruelty. That is maturity. And it's difficult, especially when you've been trained to equate love with suffering. But Jung's teachings remind us, if a relationship demands that you lose yourself to keep it alive, then what you have is not love. It is survival. And survival love always comes with a cost. Your joy, your rest, your confidence, your dreams. So the question is, how much longer will you keep paying? One of the greatest traps we fall into is this belief: if I just find the right words, they will change. If I stay a little longer, they will finally realize what they are doing. If I love them harder, they will eventually love me back in the way I need. But this entire belief rests on a dangerous lie, that you are responsible for someone else's healing. You are not. You can support, you can listen, you can hold space, but you cannot carry. Carl Jung warned that the moment you confuse your identity with being the fixer, you have stepped out of your own life and into someone else's shadow. You are not here to serve as their therapist. You are not here to earn their affection through endurance. You are not meant to be emotionally imprisoned by the hope that one day they will finally treat you right. Real detachment begins when you let go of the outcome. When you stop drafting redemption stories in your head. When you realize people don't change because you love them enough. They change because they decide to. And until they do, your peace must come first. Here is where it deepens. That person you can't stop thinking about, the one you keep returning to despite knowing better. The one whose words echo in your mind late at night. They are not just a person. They are a symbol. A symbol of an unfinished story inside you. Maybe it's the father who never made you feel worthy. Maybe it's the mother who only loved you when you were useful. Or the friend who vanished without warning, leaving you unworthy of explanation. Jung taught that we are often drawn to people not only for who they are, but for what they awaken within us. If you chase validation from someone emotionally distant, it may be because you were raised to believe love must always be earned. If you constantly try to prove your worth in relationships, perhaps it's because your earliest bonds taught you love meant usefulness, not simply existence. You are not just attached to a person. You are tied to the old story your nervous system wrote long before they appeared. That is why detachment feels like death, because to release them means facing the deeper wound beneath. So we wait. We wait for closure. We wait for a genuine apology. We wait for acknowledgement of the harm done. But this is yet another trap. You don't need their apology to start detaching. You don't need their validation to make your pain real. You don't need their understanding to justify your side of the story. Healing is a solitary act. Detachment, true detachment, begins when you stop needing them to confirm your reality. Jung would call this individuation, the process of becoming whole within yourself, apart from the masks, roles, and illusions you once carried. You are not the version of yourself who shrank to be loved. You are not the one who stayed silent to avoid conflict. You are not the one who mistook approval for affection. You are something deeper. Someone who remembers what it feels like to belong to yourself. And detachment is the road that leads you back there. People will accuse you of being cold. They will claim you have changed. They will insist you gave up too easily despite all the chances, the conversations, the endless emotional labor. But Jung knew that truth often sounds cruel to those accustomed to lies. And silence often feels threatening to those who once controlled you through noise. When you stop over-explaining, when you stop defending your choices, when you stop softening your truth for the comfort of others, you are finally free. Because here is the secret. You never truly needed to detach from them. You only needed to detach from the version of yourself that believed you had to stay. This is where many people get stuck. They think, if I detach, what will be left? No familiar person. No predictable drama. No one to chase, to save, or to fix. Just you. And that thought alone can feel terrifying. Because most of us were never taught how to exist without emotional entanglement. We were taught to measure our worth by how useful we were to others, how patient, how loyal, how forgiving. We were praised for enduring. We were conditioned to believe that devotion, even when it drained us, was love. But the truth is different. Your value is not measured by your capacity to endure. Your identity is not forged in someone else's chaos. Your life does not need to be a battlefield where love is endlessly tested. When you choose detachment, you don't become less loving. You simply become less available to those who confuse love with control. You don't grow distant. You grow closer to yourself. And for the first time, maybe ever, you can hear your own voice beneath all the noise you thought you were responsible for fixing. Yet letting go isn't only the end of a connection. It is the beginning of something far more difficult. Facing the part of yourself that keeps choosing pain and calling it love. And if you are willing to face that, then you are about to uncover the deeper meaning of detachment. Think about how it began. You said yes when you longed to say no. You smiled even when you felt invisible. You stayed silent to preserve peace while your heart screamed inside. At some point, you learned survival meant becoming small. Not physically but emotionally. Invisible. Polite. Easy to love. And you mistook that for strength. Jung would call it what it truly is, a mask. A survival mask crafted from fear, guilt, and the conviction that love must always come at a cost. Here's how it usually unfolds. Someone crosses a boundary. You feel uneasy. But instead of protecting yourself, you feel guilty. You say they didn't mean it like that. They're going through something. I don't want to make things worse. So you stay. You swallow the discomfort. And you call it love. But that guilt isn't your conscience speaking. It is conditioning. Jung believed that guilt, when distorted, becomes a tool of control, especially in childhood, when you were rewarded for being easy, punished for being too much, and praised for ignoring your needs to serve others. You were trained to confuse guilt with goodness. Now, as an adult, every step toward your own peace feels selfish. Even when someone is blatantly disrespecting you. Even when staying is breaking you from the inside. That isn't love. That is emotional confusion dressed as compassion. One of the hardest parts about detachment is this, feeling as though you owe everyone an explanation. Why you stopped calling. Why your replies grew shorter. Why your energy shifted. But if someone truly saw your pain, you wouldn't need to explain. You wouldn't need to craft long speeches justifying your need for space. You wouldn't need to rehearse words to make your leaving feel fair. People who genuinely care about you don't demand explanations when you choose peace. They feel it. They understand. They respect it. And those who don't were never really listening in the first place. Jung cautioned against performing your healing for the sake of others. Because true healing isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with theatrics. It isn't proven with PowerPoints and speeches. It is quiet, subtle, sacred. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to convince anyone you are not being cruel. You are allowed to walk away without explanation. And in that silence lies your freedom. Some of us didn't grow up being cared for. We grew up as the caretaker. You were the one making sure everyone else was okay. You were the one cleaning up the emotional mess left behind by others. You were the one who stayed calm while chaos unfolded around you. But here's the truth. When you grow up in that role, your nervous system begins to equate love with responsibility. So when you try to detach, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like abandonment. Not because you are abandoning others, but because a part of you believes you are betraying your very purpose. Jung once said, "One of the deepest illusions of the human psyche is the belief that we are here to fix what once broke us. You are not here to mend the pain that raised you. You are not the therapist of your family. You are not the anchor holding your partner's storms in place. You are not the referee, the rescuer, or the bridge between worlds. You are allowed to be a person, not a role. You are allowed to want peace, not performance. You are allowed to choose rest over endless rescue missions. And yes, you are allowed to detach from anything that makes you forget this simple truth. But here's where it hurts. The moment you begin to detach, something unsettling happens. People get angry. Not because you harmed them, but because you stopped letting them harm you. They say you've changed. They say you've grown cold. They accuse you of acting different. But what they truly mean is this: you are no longer doing what I want. You are no longer reacting the way I'm used to. You are no longer letting me control the emotional rhythm of your life. Jung wrote that when you finally reclaim your boundaries, you threaten the entire ecosystem built on your lack of them. Your silence disturbs their control. Your peace unsettles their chaos. Your distance forces them to sit with themselves, something they've spent a lifetime avoiding. So of course they lash out. Of course they make you question yourself. Of course they guilt trip you into staying small. But that isn't your truth to carry. You are not difficult to love. You are simply more difficult to manipulate now. And that is progress. Detachment isn't a one-time act that instantly brings freedom. It is not a switch you flip. It is a muscle you strengthen. Some days you will feel unshakable. Other days, a song, a photo, or a text will send you spiraling back into the quicksand of old emotions. And that is okay. Jung didn't teach perfection. He taught awareness, consciousness, the courage to notice what is happening inside you and to choose differently, again and again. So if you feel yourself slipping back into old patterns, romanticizing the person you had to leave, doubting your growth because the pain still lingers, pause. Take a breath. Remind yourself, feeling pain does not mean you made the wrong choice. It means you cared deeply and now you are healing even deeper. Your emotions are not setbacks. They are signals. And detachment means learning how to listen to them without letting them lead. One of the most painful lies you may carry is this, that by walking away you became cruel, that by choosing silence you turned selfish, that by not replying you hardened into indifference. But that is not the truth. You became quiet because words no longer worked. You grew distant because closeness was costing too much. You became protective because you were tired of being emotionally robbed. Detachment was never about punishing anyone. It was about remembering that your heart is not a rental property. It is a home. And not everyone deserves the key. Here lies the hidden gift of detachment, clarity. When you stop emotionally babysitting people, when you stop rescuing them from the consequences of their own behavior, when you stop filling the gaps with hope instead of reality, you finally see them as they truly are. Some only appeared kind because you were generous with your interpretations. Some only seemed loving because you ignored their patterns. Some only felt special because you handed them access to a heart they never learned how to hold. Jung wrote that the greatest tragedy is not losing others, but losing yourself in the attempt to keep them. And when you finally let go, it feels as though a fog has lifted. The same words that once made your heart skip now sound hollow. The same gestures that once felt affectionate now reveal themselves as manipulation. The same presence that once comforted you now drains you. That is not bitterness. That is awakening. And it is the beginning of real healing. But here is something few will tell you. When you detach, you don't feel instant relief. At first, what often comes is grief. Because even toxic attachments carry memories. Even painful bonds hold moments of sweetness. Even harmful dynamics felt like home, at least for a time. And leaving them doesn't only end a relationship, it ends a fantasy. The fantasy that one day everything would finally work out. That they would understand you, that they would choose you, that they would change for you. Jung believed maturity begins the moment you stop waiting for that story to change and start writing your own. And grief, strange as it may seem, is part of that process. You grieve the version of yourself that begged for love. You grieve the effort you poured out but never had returned. You grieve the time, the energy, the dreams you invested. But beyond the grief, something else slowly arrives. Not loud, not sudden, but steady, gentle, and real. A peace that no longer depends on anyone else. A love that arises from within. A strength no one taught you, because you had to build it yourself. And yet, one final question remains. Because even when you let go of people, something harder still lingers. What if the deepest attachment is not to them at all, but to the pain itself?